Hey everyone, I'm Lorraine Driscoll, founder of Building Better Brains, and I want to put forth a idea that I want to make sure that you are looking at if you have a child who is struggling with learning or behavior issues. And that is looking at the role of inflammation in the brain, which can sound super scary, and it totally can be if it's really serious or intense. But for a lot of kids, it's really one of the underlying factors with learning and behavior issues like autism, like ADHD, even more things like auditory processing disorder, ASD, all of that type of stuff. So it's really easy to think, no, my child just has dyslexia, they just have ADHD, they just have autism. But if you have an irritable kid, a kid who's up and down, whose behavior or difficulties with reading, writing, and so forth is good one day and bad the next, and all of that type of stuff, you really want to listen up and consider if inflammation is playing a role. So, inflammation actually plays a role in a lot of these disorders with learning and behavior. That's what the research shows, including mood disorders like depression and anxiety. And so it's ultimately a major factor that gets overlooked. And we just think of it as this is just the way, a child is and so forth. So really, let's just get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes. I'm going to go through the signs of, what that looks like so that you can start to get an idea of this could be a factor that you need to look into with your child. But number one thing is to understand that as the brain develops, there are these cells in the brain called glial cells. And what these glial cells do is they prune. And you might have heard before that, when kids are really young, they have like a ton of neurons and connections and so forth. And then there's this pruning process. And that actually helps the brain to function optimally, to develop and function optimally more efficiently and so forth. So what these glial cells do is they prune neuron activity, connections, so that these connections and brain cells and so forth can migrate to optimal areas of the brain. And then they can branch into new connections that are going to be more effective, useful, however you want to think of that. And they even help to remove unnecessary debris and matter and so forth. And so in a nutshell, it really helps the brain to develop optimally and so forth. But glial cells have another job as well. They are part of the brain's immune system. So they can invoke inflammation, and inflammation is not all bad. We always think of, oh my goodness, inflammation, we got to get down the inflammation. Whenever there's like an immediate injury or insult to the brain or the body, we need inflammation. It can help us heal. But the problem is chronic inflammation that goes unaddressed, and that's where it can really wreak havoc. And the problem is that with glial cells, they can't be turned off as easily as other immune cells in the body. And so this is going to result in chronic inflammation if this happens. And it can occur because of a major trigger. And that can even happen like a concussion, like a serious concussion. You hear about these people who just can't seem to get better, or something other like a major toxic insult, or it could be several smaller triggers, which I'm going to talk about another time. But just to give you a tidbit, things like one example would be like an unaddressed food sensitivity that just keeps, that there's that small continuous insult or trigger to the brain, and the inflammation just starts to become chronic and so forth. So chronic inflammation in the brain results in damage to tissue. Basically, if you think of it as these glial cells start to go rogue, the ongoing trigger basically activates these glial cells. And what that means is because they're busy doing what they think is an immediate job to bring, with the inflammation process and so forth, they are not available to optimize brain development. And so this is why it's much more detrimental when this happens to someone like a child who has a developing brain, as opposed to an adult who still totally can suffer and have cognitive decline and depressions with anxiety, or issues, with depression and anxiety and all kinds of other issues. But it's so detrimental when the brain is developing, because it's going to hinder that process to greater or lesser degrees. So if it's not available for optimizing brain development, then it means it's not available to do the pruning, the organizing, the neuronal connections, as well as removing all of that debris. So really crucial here. Inflammation slows down communication between neurons. So I'm going to say that again. Inflammation slows down communication between neurons. So that communication is going to be slower. So when there's inflammation, this is where kids are going to have a harder time with all kinds of issues because it's going to affect the brain's overall functioning. And this breakdown can occur in various areas. So it can occur, and what I mean by that is in one kid, it could show up as dyslexia. In another kid, it can show up as writing difficulties. In another kid, it could be ODD or OCD. The list, anxiety, depression, the list goes on and on. And you're probably wondering, well, how do we know, like, why is it inflammation going to cause ADD in one kid and LD, or contribute to LD in another kid, and so forth? And it really has to do with every child has a unique biochemical makeup in terms of what they're exposed to in their environment and their genetic makeup. And those two factors are going to come together to determine what is going to, be the thing that's going to be most affected in terms or by this inflammation. And what's really key to keep in mind is that our daily environment is more bombarded with stuff than any other generation. So you and your child might have a very similar genetic makeup, and eat the same, foods and exposed to the same environment. But your child is more vulnerable to having a higher toxic load and being more affected cognitively or behaviorally because their brain is still developing and they're just bombarded with way more stuff. So let me know if you're watching the live or the replay, if any of these signs of inflammation resonate, are like, oh my goodness, this is totally my child. So poor memory, aggression, brain fog, poor coordination or poor balance, poor focus, poor processing speed, tics, OCD, reading, writing issues like dyslexia, dysgraphia, anything, visual processing disorder, irritability, picky eating, sleep issues, could be trouble falling asleep. It could be issues staying asleep, like frequent waking, deterioration in schoolwork. So when my daughter had PANS, which is a neuroautoimmune condition where her immune system was attacking her brain, she had crazy inflammation to the point she would complain of headaches, and sometimes her head would actually feel warm to hot to the touch. She would have deterioration suddenly in her handwriting or frequent waking or not being able to fall asleep. And that's when we knew she was going into a flare. Bedwetting. And that's like, sometimes parents will be like, I don't understand it. For a few months, he's fine. Then all of a sudden he's wetting his bed again. Hyperactivity, defiance ties right in with that ODD. That's huge with brain inflammation and that irritability piece. And then other things like heat intolerance. That was a huge thing with my daughter when she had a lot of brain and body inflammation, seizures, as well as autism spectrum disorder. These kids just tend to have, when they look at the markers, they have way more inflammatory markers when they do biochemical testing. So I'm going to just touch on physical symptoms because that's worth noting as well, because inflammation affects everything. This is getting a little bit out of the brain, but I want to address it because these are the things that make parents go, oh my goodness, there's a connection there. Yes, there is absolutely a connection with what is going on with your child on a physical level, with what's going on a cognitive, brain level, neurological, behavior, emotional level as well. So if your child either has diagnosed or undiagnosed food allergies or food sensitivities, that's not only going to cause inflammation, but the inflammation is going to increase that as well. Asthma, eczema, inflammatory bowel disease. A lot of autistic kids have Crohn's and colitis. Autoimmunity in general. A lot of headaches. My daughter always had issues with headaches, and it was often on her right side. That doesn't mean it should be on the right. For her, it was because she had a right brain weakness at the time. Stomach aches, constipation, diarrhea, psoriasis, acne, skin issues. So all of these, among so many other things, are signs of inflammation in the body. But I like to really focus on the previous list with all of those neurological or neurodevelopmental signs that we see that are affecting kids. So there's really, really key is to reduce that inflammation and find out what's the trigger, not just trying to, manage the inflammation with supplements and food, which can be in really, really crucial, but is there an underlying trigger as well? So I'm actually going to be talking way more about that tomorrow. in terms of what you can do and so forth, both causes as well as what you can do to mitigate that. So let me know in the comments below, do you think this is a factor with your child? A lot of people are always like, oh my goodness, yes, this is totally a factor. I didn't think of that or didn't know that. And if you are interested in learning more, join my free talk next Thursday, June 30th, 12 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be talking about my 4 top tips or things you could be doing this summer to improve learning and behavior. And it does not mean you have to take on a full-time job to do this. Simple things you can weave in so that your kid does not go off the rails in summertime, which the first little bit, it can be really relaxing for kids. But then after a while, sometimes that all those factors that shift during the summer can put them, throw them off the rails. And then it can be harder to get them back on track come the start of the school year. So if you are interested in knowing more about my actual program, the Full Potential Formula, do hop on to actually, I'm going to put the comment or the link in the comments below, and you can book a free clarity call to learn more about my 6-month program, how we bring all of this together to really create some real changes in the brain. So thanks for watching, everyone. Have a fantastic day.